Welcome to a new episode of Becoming a Post-Growth Planner, Obstacles and Challenges to Changing Roles and Practices. My name is Christian Lamker, Assistant Professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And today, for the first time in this podcast, I'm very happy to welcome Sofia for a second time in this series. We had our first talk in January 2023. Now it's 2026. And in the meantime, lots of things have happened to you regarding post-growth, but also regarding where you work, as we are talking now as you are at Oslo Metropolitan University.
Hello. Thank you for having me back. Yeah, a lot has happened in 3 years. I'm now starting my second postdoc at Oslo Met, where I'm working with scientist Ramis Orlu on pollution dispersal in cities. But I've arrived here, I guess, the past 3 years. When we last spoke, I said, okay, I'm trained as an artist and a historian, and I'm just entering post-growth space. And I've spent these 3 years trying to bring that knowledge to the debates. And now I'm putting it into practice in this new postdoc.
Looking forward to also hearing a bit about that later. But first, last year, so still in 2025, you have worked on a project called Critical Cartographies, Artists' Experiences of Affordable Housing in Thamesmead, London. So I've just quoted the title. What made this project special for you?
So this is a mapping project I proposed a couple of years ago for a job on affordable housing. And with this grant from Bow Arts Charity, I was able to develop it. And the research question was really, how can art be a form of research appropriate to the representation of artists' experiences of unaffordable housing in London? I'm from London, and it's a huge issue here. Like the average rent for a one bed is 1,700 per month. So in this project, I wanted to focus on artist experiences, and that's obviously something that's interesting to me and special to me because I am an artist. But it also was a way to understand how I could bring art into my research. The aim was to represent artist experiences of affordability in Thamesmead, which is an area in southeast London, in relationship with power dynamics and actors in the area.
How did you approach that methodologically? Participatory methods. I read that you co-created large-scale maps, I quote, that integrate personal narratives, emotions, images, and artists' materials. How did you do that?
Yeah, so I should say that the point of departure for the project was some work by Dr. Anna Pagani, who you probably know, and she's an expert on housing in England. And she was showing me her systems maps, and I looked at them and I found them really fascinating, but they are quite complicated and opaque to somebody who's not trained. So we were saying, okay, how can we use art to represent people's experiences and histories, which kind of get stripped out of these systems maps? And so I developed bottom-up methods for speaking with artists and residents and an activist in Thamesmead, using artistic methods at interview to gather data. So I did a drawing workshop on affordability with the artists, and I asked everybody to send in photos. I did drawings, and I spent a lot of time on site. And I went to the archives, local archives, to look at videos. And I joined a local craft circle run by Marcus Orlandi, where there was a lot of original residents from Thamesmead, and they were teaching me how to crochet. And when they were teaching me, they'd also be telling me their stories. So all of this created a huge body of data, let's say, that I then used to make these maps that are really large. So like over 2 meters by over 1 meter. I can't remember exactly dimensions, but it looks like a banner, which obviously has a tradition in protest, but also in blanket making with the crocheting. And I exhibited those in October.
Cool. Yeah, when I started working around post-growth planning some 10 years ago, so arts was some integral part of that then moved a bit aside, also because I would call myself never an artist. So you're more the expert on that. And with all these methods, what it might also be a specific point of view or perspective from artists towards post-growth futures. So what's the unique point that you got from there?
Well, I guess it's important to say that artists aren't like a homogenous group. they're like a cross section of society, right? So I'm in the project, I was speaking to artists, but they have a big mix of experiences and ideas, just as a normal group of people might. And so like an artist's point of view doesn't necessarily exist, but I think it's more the idea that all of this knowledge is valid and should be brought into planning, critiques, and decisions. So it's okay to, have. I know that planning uses photos already, but yeah, things like participants' own drawings, their experiences of place, rather than putting a sticker on a piece of paper that says, okay, like the tools that are given to them top down, kind of thing.
Yeah. Did you there observe specific differences or how discussions unfold also if you do things by your hand together compared to, let's say, just using words or just having written conversations online, whatever?
Yeah, it was really nice in the workshop because if you make drawings together and then you can ask people to kind of say like, what do you see in this? People start to see each other or analyze each other's thoughts, or it kind of builds a community around the sharing of much more almost personal feelings or being vulnerable in that space. Like even for the artist making a drawing, some of them really weren't comfortable with it, right? Because you have to kind of, yeah, it's more exposing. So it created a discussion which also built solidarity, I'd say.
What helped also to provide also a safe space where such discussions can also maybe take a step further and then also relate in some way further to even policy making. That's my interest also from a planning perspective.
Yeah, I guess it's the big issue, isn't it? Like, how do you then bring that knowledge into something that's a bit more policy concrete? Well, in the exhibition, I would hesitate to say that I didn't want to provide at the end of this project like a list of bullet points for policy. The point was to represent a really complex issue through a lot of different forms, in ways that conveyed the problem, and then allowed people to see it from all different sides, because it was more like the issue of housing is so complicated. There's not necessarily like a bad guy and a good guy, right? It's a system that's got its flaws, and so it was more bringing all of those experiences that are invisibilized a lot by maps of place, like or in those discussions, into conversation with the people that are having those conversations.
Housing is quite fundamental in the sense of it needs land, material, lots of money involved. So to make it affordable, to shift value towards social value, towards other ways of valuation is quite a task. So did you observe some kind of frustration also there, how to keep the motivation and also spark the interest to that art can actually do something there against maybe a large scale task that's under large economic pressures as well?
So Thamesmead is I can speak about Thamesmead. It's quite a difficult context because basically the artists are brought in as guardians in a regeneration scheme to look after these properties before they're demolished. So their position in those properties is dependent upon the relocation of previous residents in social housing, right? So it generates a tension there where there's like activists coming in to oppose the demolition of these social housing estates. There's artists there who are in need of an affordable home and have very few options other than to seek housing that will be then demolished. And then you have residents, many of whom have already been told to leave. So in this sense, there's a huge tension there where art isn't necessarily the solution. But I do think that, through discussions with people in the scheme, well, obviously the scheme itself provides housing for artists, that's great. But the question was, okay, how can we bring artists into this process before the regeneration itself is agreed? Like, how can we mediate between people and create participatory processes through art before the answer is demolition, right? But that's not what I was looking at, but I do believe in it.
how can it work then also to make artists feel even more recognized in that sense? And I sense a bit can be a danger, a slippery pathway to say art's just a bit of an excuse or some kind of covering major things that happen, and then afterwards, after the things are done, what's then, let's say, towards affordable housing for all, towards a bit of a larger picture.
Well, yeah, because the artists are there because the rent is £600 to £900 per month, right? And then, of course, they're given professional contracts there to do their work, and so they contribute to like placemaking objectives for the space, which creates a culture, like creates nice places to be. And then the buildings are demolished, and the artists aren't necessarily able to afford the properties that are there. So then the artists are in this cycle of, let's call it displacement, where they then move even further out, having moved there from even, it's already like a cycle. Yeah. So the real question is, how can you maintain affordability over the long term? And that's what BoArts is doing, because they acquire property in the area. But again, that property is acquired through partnership with the charity that is then blamed for gentrification, or like using the artists as a kind of art washing for their scheme.
You mentioned property. How much does it relate to property, to with BoArts? Owns certain stuff, or where's then the relation to spatial planning policy, the challenge to maintain affordability, maybe, or also give artists some longer term perspective?
As in artists to remain in the space with affordable rents. Well, so the BoArts' answer to that question is to acquire property through partnership with Peabody, because there's no guarantee that Peabody will keep the rents affordable. So I don't have the answer for that. I don't think anybody does. I mean, ideally, the demolition of the housing estates wouldn't result in a net loss of social homes and privatization, meaning that the whole area could stay, more affordable. But that's not the case in Thamesmead.
Yeah. Sometimes arts can deliver, let's say, rather utopian, be even crazy, different, radically alternative ideas in all these arts processes. Was there something unexpected happening, some ideas, some spark for something that, let's say, even you didn't expect when you went into that?
Oh my goodness, Thamesmead. I wish you could go to Thamesmead. I think everything was unexpected there. I guess, was there anything unexpected? Well, I can speak about the tension between two groups of artists, because one of the main issues there was the activists and the artists, who were both, originally advocating for the same thing, like both decry that like injustice of the demolition of the Lesnes estate, for example. But actually there was a lot of tension there in the end, because the activists accused the artists of art washing. And so you see again, like people in need of an affordable home turning on each other, rather than, because that's a way to like create a discussion around the issue, but also it does stigmatize the artists. So yeah, I was surprised to see how some people were defining themselves as the artist against other people defining themselves as the artist. And this category, along with the category of resident, was really used to like push the conflict forwards. Yeah, so less of a hopeful thing there, but more of an observation.
Did you change your mind on the whole project during the time of last year, or during the time of engagement?
I think the issue is that you can see from so many perspectives, right? And it's not that at least you would hope that nobody's inherently doing wrong. Like it is a really complicated issue. And so one of the challenges with the research was being able to see from those sides and not to close down any conversation. So like, for example, in the exhibition, I made a tower block out of a packing crate that was given to me by an artist. And on each side, I represented the arguments of different groups. So one side had the Peabody, one side had BoArts, one side had the activists, and one side had the artists. And you could move around the block and draw connections between all the different material. And that was really important because that conversation never happened, because people couldn't achieve a dialogue. And so, yeah, it was important to me to show fairly, as far as I could, the different perspectives, without, yeah, to like allow people to generate their own judgments rather than me to say like this is wrong or this is right, you know.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experiences. Indeed, I've never been to Thamesmead, so I can only read into that or listen to you to get some idea
Yeah.
what has happened there. But from there, I would like to zoom a bit out, because just before 2024, you authored a book chapter, Spatial Critiques of Growth, a bit closer to planning, maybe to urban history as well. So why would you say is the spatial question, is space so crucial to advance post-growth futures?
Well, I suppose, you know, we both know from your work, like the paradox there that spatial planning is in many ways is generating problems for itself to solve, right? Like with the externalities of construction, etc., are then issues like pollution that planning is tasked with solving. So the spatial question is crucial for post-growth futures because otherwise it's just in this loop, as with many things. So yeah, like rethinking how we do planning. And last time we spoke about how art can play a part in that because it can generate new narratives or like new imaginations, of the city that aren't necessarily growth dependent.
Yeah, I think you're an important part of that, and it's wonderful to listen to your stories and experiences also from Thamesmead. On the other side, it brings me also a bit back to the question that I think we touched upon that also last time. What is with specific good examples, ideas that are all around, and then on the other side, the potential to scale up, scale beyond, to, let's say, lead to something that is much larger, or let's say to start at least a bit larger than a single neighborhood or a certain type of project. Do you have any new ideas on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, broadly, let's talk about art as a way to reach like popular attention, because I guess the point of art is not just a communication tool, right? But that is one of its strengths is that you can use emotions or create stories that are post-growth aligned or adjacent, to bring people on side, like rather than, you know, giving them information and facts and overwhelming and so people shut down. Like how can you create a fascination around ideas through art? And I think that's one of the challenges for post growth, right? To like activate people's desires and etc. So that there is potential for scaling up, let's say, post growth by making art that can reach many people. For me, like I know there's a big debate in post growth about, you know, we need to go beyond the local, etc. But I do think in the case of art and history, there's something there where you can build locally appropriate narratives or like touch points for communities to engage with that then they can like maybe think about alternatives for them. So in our British Academy project, which is this post-growth cities project, we're thinking about, I did some archival research in Islington, and we're going to use some of the things I found to as a touch point in workshops with people to think about alternatives to low traffic neighborhoods. So I do think there is a place for the local there, especially with history and art.
So maybe we just need more locals, let's say, or what others would call horizontalism or horizontal replication. Or,
Yeah, well, it's a method, right? So if you can have a method that is can be adapted to different contexts where it's, you know, situated and appropriate, then yeah, that's the question rather than how do we just create one big thing for everybody.
yeah, you have insights from your work into many more different places now than I have, I must say. And now you've explained before we started the recording that you are currently deep into engineering and into also
Yeah.
kind of a new learning experience. Can you explain a bit what are you doing now and what brought
Yeah.
you there from yeah, all the artists' experiences that we've talked about?
Okay, so I as context, when I was at the Post Growth Innovation Lab for my previous postdoc, My project was on how artists and scientists collaborating together can generate new approaches to environmental policymaking. And I followed this transdisciplinary site art project, which is conducted at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. And there were 13 projects there with artists and scientists working together, and they came up with some really post-growth aligned like ideas and narratives. And so with this project, my postdoc now, basically I'm taking those learning forwards and I'm doing an art science project with Ramis. And the idea is to look at pollution dispersal, specifically vortices, which are something that happens in fluid dynamics around us all the time. So like when it's a whirlpool, when you stir your cup of tea, that's a vortex. But as we know, like in cities, they are really essential for dispersing pollution, getting rid of it rather than it just sitting still. So yeah, it's a very open-ended project, but the premise is that transdisciplinary projects open up different ways of seeing and understanding issues. So how can we do science differently by bringing in these artistic methods? And also, how can we bring this problem to attention through transdisciplinary methods? So I'm a violinist and a painter, and we're going to be doing some experiments with sound and lasers and paint. But I'll be able to tell you more about that when we've actually done them. I think at the moment, I'm building a framework for considering air as a legal person in environmental law. So this rights of nature movement. And from there, maybe thinking about the body of air as in the discussion room with us.
Sounds like you almost embody transdisciplinary research. What does it make to you, or how are you able to cope with then also the quite different viewpoints or angles to look at the world, from arts, from music, from the more hard sciences, water, and
yeah, I think it's just really nice to be in a room with people that can have the same. You can look at the same thing, and then Ramis will say something, and I'm like, wow, like I never thought. We were chatting about painting, and he was saying, okay, well, if you can assign like if you get a group of people to paint a thing and you make a note of like the thickness of their line or which paintbrush they use or which color, and you assign numerical values to that, then you can use like the whole history of turbulence research to understand like the psychology behind this thing. And I was like, wow, like I never thought of painting by numbers in that way, but like it's interesting to see how different disciplines approach a technique differently. So yeah, it's opening my mind to the possibilities of art in different ways as well.
it might be a bit too early for that, but maybe for our next talk, we'll see when that will be. Hope, an interest, an idea that you think you will develop until then from this new jump into the Vortex project and what you're doing now.
Okay, so one of the two things, the history of mechanical engineering is overwhelmingly male, and it's also represented vortices in quantitative ways, right? So like it's all about the Reynolds number or like the number of the flow and la 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 la, and all the experiments are done in very controlled settings. So that gives rise to particular ways of imaging, and they're all on a plane surface, so 2D. Even if they represent a 3D structure, but it's on a plane surface. And one of the things we wanted to do was to create an album of fluid motion, but with the scientists like kind of letting loose, and then also being able to include as data their stories and experiences, which in a more personal way, like it's a vortex or flow is something that we also understand quite philosophically, and we can learn things about ourselves when we do experiments. So it was meant to be, or it will be, an album of fluid motion that allowing scientists to do art. And just see what comes out of that.
Well, science sounds like a large new challenge for the whole team around. for yourself, for the others. With where I must say, I'm already very curious about what the outcome is, and what you will make of this wide combination.
Me too. I think it will be also, it's worth saying, like, it's not going to be just a beautiful thing. Like the purpose of the project is to shift perspectives on the air so that you can see it as something that you want to care for and as an equal, rather than, a space to be filled by pollution or to be managed. So it does have a kind of important thrust behind it, but also it's meant to be a bit of an experiment.
In our last meeting 3 years ago, we talked about post-growth planning as making spaces for alternatives, experimentation, artistic communities and practices, and the transformations that can induce. And your Thamesmead project somehow speaks of that you really live also this way of thinking. If you make a statement now, post-growth planning is, how would you finish this sentence as now in the beginning of 2026?
Post-growth planning is in need of creative methods for collectively imagining new futures, I think. It sounds vague, but I think it's more like we haven't really treated that research question. Like how can creative methods be used to involve different types of knowledges in planning and thereby bring about like a post-growth city? For example, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they were chatting about emotional planning and how you might bring that kind of data into decision making. And I think those are interesting avenues for post-growth. So yeah, how can we develop creative methods to bring in a broader range of knowledges into planning?
So I'm already looking forward to the coming years of what will follow then. I'm also thinking back to 10 years ago when we started with post-growth planning thought, and then had also a few workshops that were actually more on emotions, even on a bit of, let's say, creative cartography. So it might be the time to now refocus that, and for the next years put more emphasis to say that is a crucial part to think together about the spatial futures and the way how we can actually make them real.
Sounds good, yeah.
Thanks a lot for joining me for the second time in this podcast. And now as you really jump into your new project in Oslo, also a lot of success there with new colleagues, the new environment. And I've heard that you also learn Norwegian.
Oh my God, yeah.
Quite a challenge.
Yeah, I'm a month into my Norwegian A1 classes. I would say it is a challenge. I'm not going to lie. Like, yeah, it's really hard. But we're getting there.
Okay. Thanks a lot.